First of all, I've heard a lot of talk about cost of housing and housing availability, and one of the good things is we're all coming together. Republicans have been talking about this for years. We've consistently opposed every bill that made it harder to build housing and made it more expensive to build housing. We're seeing lots of bills that make it more expensive happen right now. And I think it's absolutely true that restrictions in the past and present have contributed to this catastrophe. I heard the speaker say the other day that we were 250,000 housing units short, which means that there's no way to solve this problem without a huge engagement by the private sector. You can't do this with public housing alone. I'm in favor of having local governments decide that this is the right thing to do. I think it'll work better when they do that. But at the same time, this idea that you demonize where you can build and where you can't build is crazy. There are plenty of places where there is employment and no housing that is not necessarily close to transit. And I know of many, many rural employers whose employees are traveling long distances because you can't build houses in small towns, small cities, and rural areas. So let's open our minds a little bit, understand that more than urban areas need the ability to house people, and people don't want to live exactly where some very ideological people want them to live.
And then do you think it's okay for the state to have that control and not the local jurisdictions?
You know, I think it would be much better if localities decided that for themselves. And there's a lot of political energy behind this. I think that they're fully capable of doing that. Last session was all about what did legislators want to do. And the result of that was deeply flawed bills. Lots of people could see the flaws. If you look at the debate in these, you'll find that every single one of these problems was anticipated, but it was about what legislators wanted to do rather than what would keep the most people safe. And I've said from the very beginning, our job should be to preserve the tools that are necessary to keep us safe and reduce the likelihood of them being misused as much as is humanly possible. And I think we've got an opportunity to do that now. On final passage for one of the major bills, I addressed the the sponsor, Representative Johnson, and told him I had confidence that he was going to listen now and that we knew that there had been overreach. Sadly, there's been tragedies because of that. The bills came about because there had been tragedies across the country and in our own state as well, and those are important to address. But with you know, a little more humility and a little more regard for people that have been doing this for a long time, we would not have that. And so I would just say, let's go ahead, have hearings on these bills, make sure that nobody feels intimidated so that they can't provide the most honest and helpful input, and then have bills that we can all agree on at the end of the session and pass on. First of all, let me tell you what I think we need to preserve. There's a clear need for emergency powers. I don't think anyone seriously argues that we shouldn't have a chief executive that has the ability to do emergency powers. And second of all, we need to have more of what exists in a very small way, and that is legislative oversight. These powers were granted to the governor, some of them dating back into the 80s, with the expectation that there would be catastrophes that would make it impossible or really hard for the legislature to get together or communicate with the governor. And I don't think anyone ever imagined that it would be more than, you know, a few weeks or a few months. We're over 700 days in now. There is no way in the state of Washington, short of the governor. The legislature actually could end the state of emergency, or the governor could end it. What bothers me the most about this is not always the specific things that the governor does, but the fact that we have a three-branch system of government, and one of them is being mostly ignored now. And I know that the majority will say, well, we talked to him sometimes and we approved many of his. Yeah, they extended them indefinitely. That doesn't seem to me like the legislature doing its part. And to me, it's very corrosive to our system of government. Now, the other thing that I think shouldn't end is the majority should decide. So the House Republicans have dropped a last bill that is the bill that I would want if I were Speaker and the governor was a Republican. It says you still have these powers, but you have to check in with the legislature. And just as importantly, the legislature can't just say, fine, do what you want, Governor. The legislature has to go on record, every individual agreeing that this is a good thing. And I don't see how that is a bad thing or a scary thing to the majority either. They get to decide. I'm glad that we're talking about the economy. The recent poll from your publication said that that was the #1 concern on the mind of Washingtonians, and it was a pretty large proportion. Hasn't been at the top since 2014. So that should tell us that people expect us to do something to help them in that sense, and that there's a ton of insecurity. And my guess is this week there's a whole bunch more sense of insecurity about something that's related to the economy, and that's empty store shelves and running out of supplies in all kinds of arenas because we have every single pass closed at a time when the governor has let go a number of the people that would have helped us open those. And we've also got our north-south corridor closed because of flooding. And we cannot just take food security and security in terms of the travel of goods and service around the state for granted, because we are always on a knife's edge with those kinds of things. And I think it's going to get worse this week before it gets better. So I've already asked people, look, take care of your neighbors, look out for each other, and don't be angry at all those truckers that are stranded on one side of the mountains or the other that might be parking in your neighborhood and plugging things up. But to get back to a little more direct part of your question, we have plenty of transportation investments that we have to make, and we can use those dollars to make a lot of those. The other thing is, and this ties back to insecurity and housing, the biggest component of housing costs, besides just the mortgage payment if you're buying a home, is property tax. It is an immense number for people that own their own homes. It's been skyrocketing because of the shortage of houses and the increasing valuations. And we allowed an agreement to lapse that made a big impact on the increasing cost of property tax. And of course, renters don't directly pay that, but if costs have anything to do with what people pay, the price of housing, then of course this huge component of property tax is a big part of that. So we ought to go back to the old agreement that you're well aware of, where the state was paying its fair share of school expenses, and at the same time we had a much lower cap on the local component of property taxes, and that would provide instant relief across the state. This actually has been a place with a lot of Republican and Democrat agreement, and just as importantly, collaboration on how do you fix this, not just in terms of setting a certain amount of money, but what can you do as far as policy. However, I think we're not going to be facing the problem if we don't also face the fact that the same person has been in charge for of every executive branch for 10 years now. And the legislature can send money, they can make broad policy, but only one person is responsible for execution in the execution of policy and management in state agencies. That's the governor. And this is the thing that I think all of you should be asking him every time he calls a press conference, because it is critical. No. The most common weapons that have magazine over 10 are also the most commonly possessed weapons for urban and suburban people for home defense. And I don't think they should be deprived of that defense option. So I'm no. It would be pretty simple to just raise the threshold on who has to pay that B&O tax. So that would be viable. It wouldn't provide, probably the nuance that some would like, but it would help the smallest businesses and would not be hard, and it would be super easy to calculate what the cost was.